Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar hosted by DLA. DLA is this Daylighting Academy. You probably already know. It's an international organization that supports the knowledge and the dissemination about daylighting by creating a networking among scientists, researchers, experts, just to promote the dissemination and the culture of daylighting among practitioners, but also among people simply interested in daylighting. And so we particularly want to thank you, DLA, for hosting this event. In this event, next. Wait a second, just waiting for the slide to move on. There we are. Just a technical consideration. This is going to be a 40-minute presentation followed by a 20-minute Q&A. If you want to participate, feel free to write your questions, maybe also by referring to the specific slide you're interested in, and please use the Q&A tool, not the chat tool. So I'll be the moderator across the session, so I'll be reading your questions in the Q&A tool, which is close, the button is close to the sharing screen, and then we'll be addressing all the questions you are going to raise. If there's still more interest, we can also remain in contact through emails and this kind of stuff. Just as a small introduction, I'm leading this group and particularly this research on the Egyptian Museum in Turin, which is a particularly interesting case study. And particularly, we are going to present the lighting analysis for the new layout, which was set up last year. It's been a year. I'm leading a 5-people research team on this research. Myself, I'm a full professor, an associate professor for the Department of Energy in the Polytechnic of Turin. And we have 2 other young researchers, Sara Colivasoni, who is going to be the first speaker after me, and then Alberto Gremo, the second speaker. But as you can see in the right side of the slide, there are also 2 technicians, Rossella Taraglio and Gabriele Cablotto, working for another department, but particularly for a laboratory called LAMSA, which is a laboratory for environmental measurement and modeling. So they are particularly expert in measuring campaign and simulations. The topic is very interesting and very challenging. So lighting and daylighting, even more critical in showcases and museums. It's a particularly challenging topic because as you can see in the slide, there are several challenges to be taken into account altogether. Particularly, the exhibition layout needs to allow the participants, the spectators, to take the maximum exploitation of the experience. At the same time, the lighting should preserve the artifacts that are being showcased. Keep in mind that light levels can be damaging for artifacts, especially for some types of light-sensitive materials, such as papyri, which are one of the most interesting parts of the collection in the Egyptian Museum. Also, other topics to be taken into consideration is how to improve the sensation, the experience, and also how to control lighting and shading system, which are going to be addressed later on in this presentation. That's all from my side. As I repeat again, I'm going to be the moderator, so I'm going to also deal the Q&A question later on. And now I'm leaving the floor to the first speaker for the detailed presentation, Sara Colivasoni. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Okay, we could start our presentation talking about the content. We started this work with our research thesis in 2022 about daylight, working in collaboration with the Egyptian Museum in Turin. And later, we will talk about what happened for the bicentenary of the museum in 2024 with the OMA project, and how our work started, so with the measurement campaign, and that made it possible to create some model for light simulations. And later we will see our conclusion of this work. Okay. Here you can find some information about the museum. It was founded in 1824 and is the second most important museum of Egypt art, later the one in Cairo. And it is so important because you can find there almost 40,000 of artifacts that become after 1 century of expedition in Egypt. And it was visited by 1 million people only in 2024, the year of the Bicentenary. Here you can find a small presentation about us because our research team is in the middle between the museum and the Polytechnico. Polytechnico is our university, and we start working on this project in 2022, and Politecnico and LAMSA helped us to share their expertise also for the instrument, for the measurement, and the Egyptian Museum, with the help also of OMA Studio. They helped us with the project and the design process, and also to go to see the exhibition and take measurement over there. Here at small timeline of our research, as I've already told you, we start our work in 2022 with the on-site measurement, and later we discussed our thesis in 2024 in February, same year of the Bicentenary of the museum. In November, they reopened the museum with the work in the Gallery of the King, that we will talk about it. And in December of 2024, we won an important prize in Italy, is the Premio Luce by AIDI, that is an Italian association about daylight. And later, in last February, we have started a new campaign of measurement in the museum, and we will talk it about later. Okay, the museum changed several times, and first important work on the Gallery of the Kings was in 1884, and later you can see how it changed, and the most important was in 2006. Okay, this is the Gallery of the King, as you have maybe seen until November. This one was inaugurated in 2006 for the Olympic Games here in Turin, but it was so successful and visitors loved it that it became permanent. It was an important work by Dante Ferretti, a scenographer, and most important thing for him was to create an evocative atmosphere with no daylight, a dark atmosphere with dark walls and also some mirrors inside, as people could see some details from the statues. And here it's a bit layout. As you can see, as also I've already told you, all the statues was close to the walls, and people just go there as in a pyramid and they could see it. I'll show you some pictures that we took on our first on-site measurement last 2 years ago, almost. And as you can see, it was dark, and it has to remember a pyramid, the inside of a pyramid. Here is the new project from OMA Studio, and the main focus was to reopen the windows to allow the lights come in the room, to the hall, sorry. And also main thing is the changing of the material to remember people that the original placement of the statues was the desert, and they were in an open air space and not in a pyramid. And they tried to replicate the desert colors. Okay, here's some images from OMA Studio about the project and about the idea that they had for this hall. From the entrance until in the middle, you can see the statue of Seti. We will talk it about later, but it's the only statue that they will not move. They hadn't moved, and overall of the hall of the Gallery of the Kings. Now I can pass the. Okay.
Thank you, Sarah, for your introduction. Now we will have a quick stop to our presentation because we would like to hear from you what you think about this whole, these two layouts that we have presented. So on the screen, you should see some very brief comments and questions. It's a very brief, anonymous survey. Clearly, there are no correct or wrong answers. It's just to know what you think about these two layouts. Starting from the first question, so in 2006 and 2024 layout, which exhibit do you prefer? Okay, we have an interesting preference for exhibit B. We are almost 62% for exhibit B and a smaller number of 38% for exhibit A. Now we move to another aspect of these two layouts. So after your general preference, which exhibit moves or excites you the most, comparing 2006 and 2024 layout? Okay, I can see now the results. And it's actually very interesting because whether the preference was going towards the 2024 layout, actually the preference as excitement and engagement with the emotional aspects of the layout is much more towards the 2006 layout with around 80% and the leftover 20% for the exhibit B, so the 2024 layout. Now let's move to very detailed. We talked about the city statue before, so now focusing just on these two pictures, we are showing you right now which condition moves or excites you the most. Okay, I can see now the results, and as we were expecting actually from the previous question, the highest part of you actually answered exhibit A, so 2006 layout. We are almost 94%, while 6% is more excited or moved by exhibit B. Last, we go to our last question for this brief survey. In this specific case of SETI II statue, which layout do you prefer, 2006 or 2024? Interesting outcome. The first question was about the general preference of the whole, considering 2006 and 2024 layout. Now we focused on just one single statue, and here the preference was almost 70% for exhibit A, so 2006, and almost 30% for exhibit B, so the 2024. This is very interesting for us because there are many considerations. So how a person perceives and feels the exhibit room, even though it is exactly the same. You have seen the same hall. In this case, you have seen in the axonometries, there are two corridors. We decided to show you only one of those and showing one detail of this hall, even though the exhibit was exactly the same. By focusing on one single detail, the statue of Seti II, the preference shifted towards another one. Now, I think we have concluded our survey, and thank you for participating. We will now delve into our research and get back to our presentation. So you have seen before the principles of lighting design. From those four principles, some research questions arose. In particular, as far as concerned the fruition, we were curious to know in terms of illuminance, what were the difference between 2006 and 2024 layout. The conservation for us was a very relevant topic, and we wanted to understand what preventive conservation policies were followed in 2024 layout. The enhancement, that is how we perceive and maybe what is the aspect that moves or excites us the most, what elements were highlighted in 2006 and are they the same in 2024? Did they change? What is the layout strategy and lighting strategy of OMA Studio for this? As far as concerned the management, since the whole project, as we mentioned, was from the architects of OMA Studio, we did not decide to delve into that. So it is not accounted for in this research. Starting from our research questions, we needed to have a framework of our methodology to assess these questions, starting from a literature review to understand what are the tendencies in the exhibit layout and the museum layout word and policies, so to grasp exhibit design concepts and outline the critical aspects. Later, we moved to on-site measurements. You've seen some of the photographs, but now we will move much more into some technical aspects we have decided to assess to understand the geometrical and material properties of the two halls. Then these results have conveyed towards a simulation tool and a model calibration. So in this case, for our research, the simulation, the digital model, was not totally separated from the real case scenario, but we really had an effort in merging the information from the real case scenario by measuring those to those we could not measure directly, such as the daylight, and we decided to simulate those. Finally, we verified the compliance of the results with the preventive conservation standards. Starting from the on-site measurements, now we will focus more on the technical aspects. You can see here some pictures of us measuring the photometric quantities of light. Thanks to this instrument, we had the possibility to assess multiple points on the surfaces of the statuaries and to understand what were the critical aspects and what were the elements that were highlighted the most in the 2006 layout. Then we moved to a material survey, so with a context spectrophotometer, that is a tool that allows us to understand the spectral reflectance of the material in different wavelength beams, we could understand what was the color appearance and especially what was the behavior when it interacts with light. Finally, in 2024, we had a chance to get back to the hall, visit it again after it was all completed, and we decided to get exactly the same measurements in order to compare the two different layouts and understand what were the differences in terms of enhancement, as we have seen before. Here we have a photographic survey, as you can see. Here, the new hall that has been made by OMA Studio. And finally, we have a new panel, similar to the ones we have seen before, where we decided to get exactly the same points as in 2006 layout. As you can see, they are spread all over the statue, so around the head, around the trunk, around the legs, in order to understand what were the focus points for Dante Ferretti intervention and what were the focus points for OMA Studio. And we decided to focus more on Horemheb statue, the first one you can see. So here you can see a comparison. First of all, in 2006 layout, as we mentioned, we had no daylight at all. While on the other side, in 2024, we had a mixed condition where electric light was supported and completed by daylight. In that case, February 25th, it was almost mid-afternoon. We were not very lucky with daylight because it was pretty overcast. But what we can see from these results is almost 5 orders of difference as far as concern the face of Horemheb statue. So we have 40 lux in 2006 and more than 200 in 2024. Also, an horizontal measure that was on the legs of the statue where some inscriptions were made. We had around 280 lux in 2006, and we rose up to 587 in 2024. Finally, you can see the basement. The statues have been lowered in order to allow visitors to perceive them much better, not seeing them as gods, as it was mentioned by the director Christian Greco, but to completely walk around those, to see all the details of the inscriptions on their surfaces. And in the case of the basement, you can see it had almost 7 lux. It was really emerging from darkness, while in this case, with 2024, we had more than 100 lux on that point. Then, probably you have seen in one of the pictures before camera, we decided to collect some luminance mapping from the observer's viewpoint. These luminance mappings are peculiarly useful for us to understand how us, visitors, can actually perceive the exhibit layout. Especially in these mappings, all the reflections of the aluminum panels that have been installed can be perceived, and we can see how they interact with the materials. You can see here as an example the case of the Sphinx, where in the picture we can all see and we can all take, you can perceive the presence of the windows behind, but in the luminance mapping it is much more evident how those windows create very different luminances. So the light coming from the surface, if we can summarize the topic as this. Another very relevant aspect, and I will focus more maybe on this picture, is how these windows create a sort of dark gray effect on the opposing wall. You can see it in the picture on the left, but if we consider the luminance mapping, those dark gray areas become an area with much lower luminance. And in the case we need to perceive the details, we need to understand and perceive and feel the statuaries inside the exhibit hall. You can see, as an example, the Horemheb statue, more or less in the middle, the very white statue that brightens up from all the others, that has a great contrast if we see it from this perspective. After that, we collected a lot of data and we needed to move to the simulation tools. The simulation tools for us were a key point to understand what we could not directly measure. As an example, we could get some measurements of punctual areas of the statuaries, but if we wanted to have a longer run measurement, we needed to install data loggers. We had done it just for one single afternoon, but to understand all the differences in seasonal changes, in temporal changes across the day, much longer measurement campaigns should be done. So to complete our thesis and to have a comparison model, we generated two digital twins, one for the daylight condition and another one for the electric light. As we mentioned, daylight varies throughout the day and throughout the seasons. So we had to choose three key areas and three key moments during the year to understand what were the effects of daylight in those cases. So we decided to have June 21st and December 21st as two extreme cases, the brightest condition and the least bright condition, and then an average condition, so the equinox, March 21st. As far as concern the hour of the simulations, we decided to have a point in time in four critical points that are 9 a.m., where the museum opens, noon, 3 p.m., and finally 6 p.m. for summer only, since considering all the obstructions, it was not really relevant maybe in winter to consider it. Instead, during summer, the museum decides to extend the time of the visitings, so having also consideration across the end of the day could be interesting and useful for us when the sun is much lower on the zenith. And finally, we decided to perform also some annual simulations in order to understand light levels and light dose in terms of lux per hour per year. Here you can see some of the results of our annual simulations. We consider also the neighboring hall of the Temple of Elegia, but for this presentation we will focus more on the Gallery of the Kings itself. The annual daylight levels were simulated in OMA Studio, and we decided to focus more on the floor level. Clearly, for preservation and conservation principles, we need to assess more the vertical surfaces around the statue. We also had an insight for just one of the statues of the hall, but the consideration of the horizontal level for us is peculiarly useful to understand the critical areas. And here you can see as an example that one of the critical points is not actually the southern area where many obstructions are present, but the northern area where the sky dome can actually have a great impact on the artifacts. We decided to have a threshold of 400 lux because by halving them, we could have an idea of having almost 200 lux on the vertical surfaces of the artifacts. And that was a critical point for the regulations we have considered. Then we have launched some simulations also for the electric light condition. Clearly, electric light is much easier to simulate. We do not have varying condition. Clearly, we have a maintenance factor we could take into account, but light levels for electric light only can almost considered be constant over time. Clearly, the design of electric light layout was made by OMA Studio, so we have inherited their ideas and their concepts, and we have moved to the simulation tool. As I mentioned before, to have preventive conservation principles checked on the artifacts we were considered, we needed to move on the vertical surfaces and vertical planes of one single statue, taken as a reference Seti II, because it was the only statuary that was not moved during the different layouts. The reasons why it has not been moved can be pretty clear to those who have visited it. It is almost 8 meters tall, so it was very impossible for them to move it from its original basement. And probably, as you have seen in the timeline, Seti II has always remained that position over time. The consideration on the vertical surfaces was made using a dualistic approach. For daylight, we had to consider the sum of all the light levels across the year, since it was varying and since it was not constrained just to the opening hours. For those who have visited the museum from the outside, at least, they have seen that the windows have no blinds at the moment, and you can always perceive the internal layout. While for electric light, it could be turned off during the closing time of the museum. So for daylight, we had a sum of the simulation for the daylight condition in OMA Studio. Instead, for the electric light, we could get just one single value, the maximum value as the worst case scenario, on each surface of the of Seti II statue, and then multiplying it by the number of opening hours during the year, which is 3,468. Thanks to that, we could assess the limiting exposure in terms of yearly light dose on the surfaces, and we decided to compare this with only electric light in 2006 layout. Clearly, the layout of electric light has changed in the two conditions, but this could be pretty useful for us to understand that in 2006, no problems arose, considering, as an example, low responsivity artifacts, while in 2024 we have some very high values. This suggested us a dualistic approach to solve this kind of issue, especially if the plan of the museum was to extend the duration of the exhibition or maybe exhibit some more light-sensitive artifacts by suggesting either a dim for electric light or, more interesting, the application of blinds and films on the window layers. More specifically, we have studied the market availability of blinds and films, and we have compared it to other halls inside the museum, such as the sarcophagi room. Probably you can see on the right side of the picture some grayish areas. Those grayish areas are actually blinds that are always deployed during the year because those sarcophagi are made by painted wood. So it is very high sensitive compared to only stone made of the statuaries. And for this reason, the conservation principles require to have a much lower light dose, especially in terms of daylight. Finally, we are moving towards the end of our meeting with what is going on in our research team. We got so passionate about it that it was not enough just to complete one Master of Science thesis. So in February 2025, even though we have already completed our academic path from that perspective, we decided to get back into the museum and have new measurements. And after we collected all the materials, we decided it was time to move to a dissemination program. So Daylight Awareness Week is actually for us a very great opportunity because it is one step towards this direction, but we have much more planned to do for the future. As an example, in spring 2026, we are planning to take part into Prometeo Tech Cultures, which is an initiative promoted by Polytechnic di Torino to disseminate scientific and academic research to high school students. It is a great opportunity for us also to engage with a much wider public and to communicate our passion for this topic and clearly to promote this kind of methodology we have decided to adopt. Also, this year we are planning to complete the model calibration, possibly with new measurements, and to add the subjective layer that was missing in our thesis originally. So the survey you have done before was part of this idea of adding the subjective layer, but clearly much more can be done. We can maybe ask what are the aspects one person is more concerned about exhibitive layouts. So we can ask much more in depth and not just by comparing these two pictures. But this could be a very first step for us, a preliminary step to understand what were the preferences of the public and what kind of results we could expect. And finally, we are expecting and we hope we can publish a paper possibly in 2026. I think we are plenty on time if the moderator agrees with us.
Of course.
Thank you clearly for your attention. And now I think we have plenty of time for an exhaustive Q&A.
So welcome back with me, everyone. Yeah, we were strict on time, so we have almost 25, 27 minutes for a Q&A session. Before starting that, I'd like also to stress out that the method we developed for this research was meant to be kind of general, with the idea, following up a specific request by Egyptian Museum in Turin, to be also applied and replicated to other showcases, other halls. The museum is very, very large. As already mentioned before, it's the second largest Egyptian museum in the world after Cairo. And so there are also different materials, papyri, sarcophagi, mentioned in the previous presentation. So the idea of mixing daylighting and electric lighting, so adding the extra value with the lighting, but also facing conservation aspects, fruition aspects, blinds, all these kind of problems was felt by Egyptian Museum as a general problem, general concern, a general challenge. So the idea was to have a method that could be replicated also to other showcases in the museum. That's why you have seen also pictures from other rooms. So having said that, just how the method was meant to be general and replicable in some way, we got some question, but I need to put my glasses back on. So a question from Nureddin, thank you for your question, asking why using the light dose concept. So maybe we can delve in more depth into this conservation and preservation aspects, which were quite important, and we summarize maybe a little bit too much. So I can reply myself, but I don't want to take. I'm a moderator, so my role, I'm maybe leaving the floor for this question to Alberto, or maybe also Gabriele is connected also from home. So if you want to add something, feel free to do that. So answer this first question by using the light dose concept, why that was so much important. Then we move to the second question. Thank you.
Here we are. Gabriele, I don't know, maybe do you want to start first?
Okay, I beg your pardon for my English because it's not so good as my colleagues. So I try to explain why we use light dose concept because at first because is a light metric widely used in conservation policies for artworks, and because it's very important to consider the light dose during over time, rather than considering the single value of illuminance over the object. We can consider, we also in our work to a European standard that is the SEN 16163, the last version, and it's very important, you can see in this table, to consider the lighting exposure, considering here, rather than the illuminance value as an absolute value. This aspect is very important in the preventive conservation policies, especially for the very high sensitive object or materials to light. So yes, we can say that in our case, in considering statues, and we range in the material classification, low responsivity, also irresponsive to light. But we consider correct to assess the light dose rather than absolute value of illuminance over the objects, over the artifacts. I don't know if I give a right.
I think it has been super extensive, so maybe what I can add is much more general compared to your very technical answer. Probably you have experienced in your life, sometimes museums display some copies of the artifacts. Clearly, they have to declare it is a copy, mainly because they cannot guarantee enough light levels, maybe for some study reasons or for exhibit reasons. across the year, but the artifact is highly light sensitive. So whenever they don't have the chance to keep a very low light level, they prefer using and they should use limiting exposure, because in that way they can exhibit the artifact for a much lower amount of time and then substitute it in case with a copy of it that is less light sensitive. A remarkable example, in my opinion, is in Villa Necchi in Milan. It is part of FAI, which is a great organization in Italy for cultural heritage. In this villa, which is actually a house, you can totally visit it with guided tours. There are some drawings that are extremely high sensitive to light, and they cannot display it all around the year because they are very close to the windows. So for this reason, sometimes they change it, they declare it as a copy, and they get into some deposits where no light is allowed, and so they can comply with those limiting exposure limits and thresholds from the CIAN regulation we have mentioned before.
Yes, and I want to give us this aspect that when we speak about daylight in museums, I think that is very important to use that metric, that is the light dose, because light dose can assess the aspect of dynamic lighting with respect to daylight. So the right metric when we are speaking about daylight museum is the light dose, the annual light dose, rather than considering single values of illuminance.
Thank you both. From my end, I'd like to add that also in the case of the statues, clearly what Gabriele and Alberto have already highlighted is particularly important, plays a crucial role on light-sensitive materials, and there are plenty in the museum, such as the papyri. But also in the case of the statues, in the statues of the Gallery of King, we had to discuss with the curator of the museums and the experts in restoration and preservation in the museums. And they told us something quite surprising, that they found traces of pigments in the statues. Clearly they're made of stone, local stones in Egypt at that time, but they were tinted, so there were still pigment of colors, which raised the risk from insensitive or non-sensitive light-sensitive material to a sensitive, light-sensitive material. So that's why the investigation on the light levels and light dose became particularly important. I think that this may close the first question. Noureddin confirms that we answer your question correctly, so thank you. Can you please share with us your presentation? So thank you, Noureddin, and thanks for your second question, which matches the other questions we received from Marie-Claude Dubois, asking about the possibility of sharing the presentation and also the thesis. Yeah, of course, we'll be happy to share both the thesis, which was written in English, so no need to translate, no need to ChatGPT for that. And the presentation could be also both a thesis presentation, but today's presentation, maybe we'll understand through the DLA owners, if they can share it with all the participants, or otherwise we can share it through dedicated emails. So thank you, Marie-Claude, and thank you, Noureddin, for your interest. We are happy to share both the presentation and the thesis if needed. And by the way, Marie-Claude wrote also that her students are working on this museum in Sweden, so there could be some interesting interaction between the two methods. So Marie-Claude, I'll be happy also if you wanted to have a discussion on specific topics about this important topic on lighting and daylighting in museums. Just checking if there are some other questions. No, it seems there is no other question, but I asked the participants to express interest in questions. There's still some more than 10 minutes of time while I'm destroying the office here. So killing the time while maybe you are not shy anymore and you maybe express some doubts or questions or interest. I'd like maybe to start a conversation, a discussion between the panelists, just to highlight better the role and the criticalities concerned with daylighting, because electric lighting, the project and designs can be more easily controlled. We can also add that the OMA Studio added several sceneries or lighting scenarios. So depending on the events, particular events that can be hosted, especially in the Gallery of the Kings, which is the most iconic room that everybody typically knows in the Egyptian museum. So the designer came up with different strategies, so the light levels can be dimmed, the color temperature can be modified depending on the event or the atmosphere. So this can be more easily controlled. But when it comes to daylight, I'm asking myself and my thesis students and also the LAMSA, the experts at LAMSA, it becomes much more critical. Sometimes light levels can be even excessive. That's why we need one or two layers of shades. Think about Renzo Piano's Houston Menil Foundation in Texas and many other examples. So maybe we can add some more insight and thought about how useful the lighting can be, but how critical the lighting can be, which raises the need for blinds, control, or films, particularly. Egyptian Museum pays a lot of attention to UV control, which could be super harmful for all the colors, color fading, which becomes critical for both the sarcophagi and the papyri, which one of the best collection in the museum. So films, anti-UV films, can be an extra layer to add. Glazing is already quite UV filtering out material, but this is not enough, and so they ask us to also do a research on UV films and blinds. So some other consideration, maybe I'm asking Alberto and Sara and Rossella and Gabri on how to optimize the light contributions in a museum, which is even more challenging, I guess. So the floor is yours while I'm checking other questions.
Thank you. Oh, the topic is indeed very, very wide. Probably we will need another webinar to fully exploit and fully.
Sure, because
Oh, we have also other questions I just discovered. So I will try to keep the answer very short. For sure, the market evaluation we have made was an effective way of start addressing this topic, but clearly the on-site measurements could also be a viable condition, because in the data logger measurements we have decided to place during one of the surveys, we could assess the UV levels that were already very, very low. This is mainly thanks to the contribution of LED lights that are mostly UV-free, and the fact that the glazing already cuts off all the UV wavelengths. Clearly, all these scenario of Gallery of the Kings is still evolving. There are some other aspects of the Egyptian museum that are still changing and are still under construction. Especially the internal courtyard will be covered by a glazed rooftop. And for this reason, we are still evolving our methodology, and we are still checking with new measurements, because we would like to assess the UV levels on some of the statuaries at least, as soon as all the construction works are completed. To optimize it, clearly, simulation is a very effective way, because we can simulate different scenarios. We can see criticalities, critical points, key moments of the year, such as we have seen just 3, but maybe a much wider and extensive simulation can lead to even more interesting results, maybe also considering the sun angles, to have a much clearer idea on what light levels we can keep and we can obtain through daylight alone, and then to optimize clearly also the energy consumption with the electric light. I hope this tried to encompass all the aspects. For sure, whenever daylight becomes excessive, the usage of blinds, maybe multiple layers of blinds, is mandatory. We suggested to the museum the adoption of a system made out of 2 different layers in our final consideration for the thesis, that encompassed a much wider openness factor and a much tighter one. The openness factor is a good metric to understand how much light it gets filtered by the blind layer itself, and especially having a multiple approach with different layers can allow to have different scenarios. Maybe we do not need to totally cut off all the daylight, because the excessive amount is very, very little, it's very limited, and so we need a very wide openness factor. Instead, on the other side, maybe we need to cut off much more daylight than in the first scenario, so using a much tighter and less visible transmittance layer can be extremely useful. Or maybe we need a combination of both to achieve almost a blackout level, such as in the case of wooden sarcophagi. Now I think we can access to the other question.
Yeah. Thank you, Alberto, very much. The next two questions are totally in line with this discussion we have just started. So Marie-Claude, again, thank you for your question, asking what is the difference in lighting between a museum for sculptures and one for paintings. So sculptures typically non-sensitive, not that sensitive light materials, while paintings are definitely sensitive. And Marcia, hi Marcia, by the way, and thank you for your question as well, asking if we did the measurements regarding spectral power distribution and if there's any UV regarding the light, which is started addressing. I can maybe just anticipate that we are planning on taking specific measurements of the UV in the next campaigns in 2026, but all our measurements were done through a spectrophotometer, so we have all the spectra. But I don't want to, again, to speak too much, so I leave the floor to you, to my panelists, to address these two questions, and thank both for your questions. Who starts?
This time I leave the floor to Sara.
Gabriele, maybe. If
Also, Gabriele, if you want
Yeah.
to answer to
Oh,
the
the
first
floor is-
question. No. Okay. For
The question of Marie-Claude Dubois, thank you for your question, is a very tricky question because we have to consider two aspects, the fruition aspect and the conservative aspect. I think that I can give an answer about the conservative aspect. And so, simply speaking, that there is a problem of light dose, of light level. Obviously, paintings, watercolors, oil on canvas are so sensitive with respect to sculptures, to statues, such as the case study of what we present before. And there is a problem of light dose. It's mainly a problem of quantity of light and the quality of light, obviously. So UV presence and or infrared radiation and so on. About the fruition is it's another aspect. It's a very interesting and tricky question because there is the aspect of how to render to enhance a statue rather than a bidimensional works of art as a painting. There is an aspect of quality of light, such as the, for example, the color rendering index of light sources. This is very important for electric lighting rather than daylight because we have the higher rendering index thanks to the daylight. And so I give the floor to Sara, sorry, but
No. Okay. Thanks, Gabriele. And yeah, as Gabriele has already told you, most important things for us was the fruition and also the how the visitor feels inside the hall and the preservation of it. We have worked mostly with the statues with some pigments, so some small parts of paintings on it, and we had to preserve it from light. And I think that we can show some pictures now about it because we had in the presentation. And maybe no. Wait, no, in the 2006 layout, we had it. As you can see in this one, there are some pigments. Now they've moved far away from the windows to preserve it, and they prefer to display some others okay that are not now the statue is here, so not in front of the windows and far from lights and also from artificial light to preserve it, but in the other areas of the museum they expose paintings and papyri and everything that could be on risk by the light. They are almost put in areas with some shading system to preserve it and conserve it. I can't remember the second question, but if you want to add something.
Well, Petra, if we measure spectral distribution values and if there is any UV regarding daylight.
Okay. So addressing to I don't know, Marzia probably. Yes, Marzia questions. Yes, we have considered the spectral power distribution for daylight, for electric light and for the materials. As far as concern the daylight, we have run some measurements during this measurement campaign in 2025 by placing some data loggers that have considered a very long run. Actually, we started around 3 p.m. Until almost 6 to 7 p.m. in order to see the decay of daylight levels in the room. Those data loggers also had sensitivity towards UV range, so we could get some measurements also from that perspective. And we have seen that with the current solutions that have been applied in 2024, there are no concerns for UV coming from daylight. So this was for us a very great and important key aspect to assess, especially during this measurement campaign. We have actually no response from the designers or from the museum if they have adopted a very specific solution to address that issue. So we do not know if they actually applied a film, if they decided to have a low emitting or a specific glass and glazing for the window. But as far as we have collected and measured, there are no UV concerns for daylight. I hope that answered and addressed to your question. I see we have no other questions. Now I leave the stage to.
Yeah, you can also draw the conclusions. I think I see there's no other questions in the Q&A box. And by the way, it's 5 to noon, so we are perfect in time, which is kind of a miracle for us Italians. But kidding aside, we really want to thank everybody for participating in this webinar, and thank you for your questions to animate the discussion. We are super happy to have had a chance to present our research, which has been quite long, as you've seen, and which is still in progress. And moving on next year, of course, living in Turin, we are all in love with this museum, which is exceptional excellence in our town. So stay tuned because you'll be hearing from us again in the future, especially through some dedicated papers in the next. Maybe there's that. Ah, no, okay. Marzia, thanking you. So thank you, Marzia, for your question. Happy that we have addressed also yours. So if there is no other specific comment, questions from the board, from the audience, I think we can call it a day for today. Just no, it seems that we are done with this.
I think it's almost done.
It's almost done. So we are also reading some real-time information and connection through the organizers. So we are perfectly on time. We can leggere.
Che fa parte della delegata per next week e ci sono altri punti.
Yeah, good point. Before closing this session, please let me remind you that the Light Awareness Week is still ongoing. So there are other events. So stay tuned on the DLA website. You can see probably on screen also a QR code to get to find an immediate and prompt link to all the events. There are other interesting topics. I myself attended at least 2 topics earlier days about this week. So I particularly appreciated the mix of scientific and dissemination content in all the speeches, all the presentations I've attended. So okay, so it's 11:57. I think we took enough of your time. So once again, thank you very much for participating in this webinar, and we'll discuss with the organizer if they can reach out to you to spread and to share our presentation and thesis, or otherwise feel free to send us an email. We'll be happy to share our material with you. So thank you very, very much from myself and my co-workers here. Thank you. Bye-bye.